Hey everyone, what's up? It's been a while since we talked about Russian volleyball, and I don't mean something abstract like tournament formats, transfer rumors or anything like that. This time I'd like to talk about specific results, because for the first time in many years I've actually been following the medal matches in the Russian Superleague properly. I'd love to sum up all the matchups in general, but Lokomotiv and Zenit decided to stretch their series to the absolute limit, so maybe we'll talk about them in a separate video. The Railwaymen decided to squeeze everything they possibly could out of Moninik Orlov before he leaves for Italy. So, as you've probably already guessed, in this video I'd like to discuss the outcome of the final series, where Dynamo Moscow claimed a convincing win over the now former champions, Zenit Kazan. And again, I share the general feeling that the end of the league doesn't really feel like the final court of the season in Russia, because in just a couple of weeks the teams will already be fighting for the Russian Cup. But alright, that's not what this is about. If we look at the bigger picture, the obvious factor is that the Moscow team had more time to recover, since they finished their series against Zenit St. Petersburg earlier. And let's be honest, in the semi-final series against Lokomotiv, Kazan didn't just spend a ton of physical energy, they also spent a lot emotionally, and at the very highest level of volleyball. That matters a lot too. But getting a little ahead of myself, I think Kazan mainly ran out of gas. Historically, it has somehow turned out that Lokomotiv is a very uncomfortable playoff opponent for Zenit Kazan. And the best case scenario for them is when Fakel gets rid of the Railwaymen somewhere in the earlier rounds, because Fakel is basically kryptonite for the team from Novosibirsk. Looking back at the results of their previous head-to-head series, and also at the matches during the current championship, a lot of people expected this to end in 3 matches. It's just that hardly anyone was betting on Dynamo to be the one doing it. But in reality everything turned out differently, and it is a shame that yet another final series in Russia ended in 3 matches. Dynamo looked extremely solid in this series, and you can't say Zenit didn't try. They did try, and they kept looking for their chances. The problem for them was that they only got those chances when Dynamo allowed them to. Overall, the Moscow side looked dominant right from the first rallies, and the only thing that could have broken their confidence was a loss in the first match, when they almost blew a 2-set lead. But after winning the opening match of the final series, there was already very little doubt that Dynamo would close this series out in their favor. You know, I'd like to give a pretty strange comparison. When for some reason I was watching the fight between Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor, I couldn't shake the thought that the only chance for the Irish MMA fighter to win would be some wild shot that the experienced American boxer somehow failed to see. But when that punch did happen and it had no real effect, I realized there was no point waiting for miracles anymore. And I had pretty much the same feeling in this final. Dynamo had more energy, and it was unlikely that Kazan would be able to wear them down. But if Kazan dug in defensively, that could be their chance to survive. I'm afraid of being wrong statistically, but visually it felt to me like most of the long rallies in this series were won by the Dynamo players. So the only key that could have saved Kazan never found the right keyhole to open the door to the gold medals. You have to understand that with all the restrictions Russian volleyball is dealing with, having a starting lineup with no foreign players, while still being at an elite level, is a luxury that the capital club has. Of course, after the departures of Yaroslav Podlesny and Tsvetan Sokolov, the bench got shorter. Even that didn't become an obstacle for Konstantin Bryansky's team. But it's not like depth really helped Alexey Verbov either. Last season he was constantly rotating the lineup and looking for the most effective combinations, but this time he barely used that option. Andrei Samachevsky tried to make a triumphant return to Kazan after his brilliant loan spell at Dynamo Ural, but he ended up firmly stuck on the bench. Mikhail Labinsky did have a good season, but it's hard to call it some kind of breakout year. And objectively speaking, Dynamo Moscow's chemistry is much better than Kazan's. It may not give them some massive, otherworldly advantage, but in certain even situations, it became that little plus that added a few extra points to their total. Strategically, Bryanski looked more confident than Verbov and his substitutions looked logical. That includes starting Maxim Belogortsev so he could use his serve, which is definitely more dangerous than Dmitry Juk's. After that, he would be subbed out and then Max would come back in to serve again in the endgame. I've seen something similar with Poland's national team using Bieniek. But Zenit's coach seemed almost afraid to make substitutions. With all due respect to Maxim Mikhailov, sometimes he should have brought in Rajan Lubric to diversify the attacking style a bit. Machine Gun Maxim is still a good option when playing fast sets where you can find a hole in the block, but Dražan can be trusted a bit more on high balls, and that could have taken some pressure off the outside hitters at times. And when it comes to distributing the load, this is where I'd like to focus on the setters. Pavel Pankov had an excellent series and clearly established himself as the #1 setter for the Russian national team, if they ever get allowed back anywhere. There were only a few rare moments where the setter lost his cool, but Konstantin Bryanski would immediately put him on the bench, calm him down, and then bring him back. The use of Ilya Vlasov is probably still a question mark for me. Earlier the middle blocker was a highlight machine, but now we don't see him involved in the attack all that much. In general, it's surprising to me that both Kazan and Moscow, despite having powerful attacking middles, barely used them. And what's even more disappointing is that there weren't many pipe attacks either, which again both Dynamo and Zenit know how to run. At times everything looked a little too primitive for the modern game. And this is where I want to stop and talk about Konstantin Abaev. Even before he came to Kazan, I said that I was very interested to see him in a freer system, where he could unlock the creative potential that had been limited by Radostin Stoichev's strict framework in Verona. But at least in the semi-final and final series, I didn't really see much creativity. Most of the game slid into setting zone 4, even when there was no real objective reason to do it. Yes, the most common comment across social media was that Abaev is not Christensen, and that's understandable. It's kind of like trying to force Ngapet's profile into Leon's empty spot. You understand yourselves, those are slightly different types of players. And when it comes to comparing setters, probably different levels at this point too. But again, my issue is not with the quality, it's specifically with the creativity. I don't know, maybe Alexey Verbov has revised his approach to the game and now the setter is working strictly by the book, but I have my doubts about that. So in the future I'd like to see more variety from Kostya, especially in the middle of the net. Because looking at the example of that same Christensen, you can see that he's not afraid to work with Verona's middles, and they show high efficiency. Although when Abaev was there, it gave the impression that it didn't make much sense. So there is clearly room for growth here. The main thing is that I hope Kostya can survive this pressure and deal with it, and then he'll still show everyone what he's capable of. But Pavel Pankov has already shown everything. I watched the third match of the series live, and he was almost perfect as Dynamo's setter. He did a great job outplaying the opponent's block and finding the right target, even without consistently perfect passes from the receivers. Yes, his serve no longer looks as monstrous as it did with the Mikasa ball, but it was the captain who closed the series with an ace, which was very symbolic. Quite often during the playoffs, fans compared Maksim Sapozhkov with Vladislav Babkevich. But to me, despite their uniqueness and importance to their teams, they are different types of players. In my opinion, Sapozhkov is a system player, while Babkevich is a player around whom the system is built. I'd be insanely curious to see Vlad in a balanced team, but for now we have what we have. And if we try to compare them, I still don't really understand why this comparison belongs in this video, but for some reason I wanted to make it, so forgive me. If we do try to compare them, then statistically their blocking and serving look roughly on the same level, but visually to me, Dynamo's opposite seems more productive in both elements. I broke down both players some time ago and noted that Babkevich's block and serve didn't really look like major strengths. Obviously, he has changed a lot since then, but that feeling of randomness seems to still be there. Sapozhkov, on the other hand, after Italy, has become a much more stable threat from the service line, regardless of the situation in the match, whether it's the beginning or the end. In attack with Sapozhkov, you can more often see some shorter angles, something like attacks from zone 2 into zone 2, into the 3-meter area, and pretty often 2. On the one hand, that makes it harder for defenders to choose their position, but on the other hand, it also creates the possibility that Maksim can hit the ball into the net. I don't really remember many moments like that from Babkovic. With him it's either block or out, because he always works at maximum height. And because Dynamo had Sapozhkov, Kazan's block was simply forced to keep a very close eye on him, and Pavel Pankov understood that perfectly. Of course, in the end games he often relied on his opposite, but at the beginning of sets he could actively work with his outside hitters. And what's surprising is that despite their very high level, it's somehow hard to call Anton Semishev and Denis Bogdan outright star players. They are versatile and flexible outside hitters, but at the same time they don't get that much attention compared to, say, the Volkov-Lebinsky pair at Zenit. But they do their job extremely well, and despite carrying injuries during the series, they still continue to be incredibly useful for Dynamo. And now about the hype. Throughout the series, many people complained that Dmitry Volkov had been dealing with health problems for most of the playoffs, which especially affected his serve. And understanding how difficult the situation was, even despite the pain, he still took risks from the service line in the third match. So Dima definitely has no shortage of character. But at the same time, there was also this opinion floating around that Volkov might have deliberately not been giving 100%, because Dynamo is his future club and he wanted to help them finally win the title. I don't know what would have to happen to an outside hitter for him to start intentionally throwing matches, but I refuse to believe that theory. What do you think about this? Write it down in the comments below. And I'm sure Kazan did everything possible to succeed. It's just that Dynamo had more of everything in the final, and I doubt anyone could bring themselves to say that this victory was undeserved. Some Lokomotiv fans were already writing on social media that their team would have looked more confident in the final, but we'll never know that now. I do have a suspicion though that it's not a given. The only thing that could have worked some magic was the home arena in Novosibirsk, but Dynamo were as ready for this final as they could possibly be at this point, and they showed that perfectly in the arena in Moscow. Alexey Verbov also got his share of criticism. Obviously the season wasn't perfect, but despite the achievements he already has, it's also hard to call him an experienced coach, so results like this will benefit him too, and I don't think it makes much sense to replace him with someone else right now. I also agree with what he said. Zenit in reality changed a lot after the last season, so it will take time for the young guys to establish themselves as irreplaceable team leaders. And finally, let me grumble a little. I don't quite understand the complaints about Dynamo's emotions. For some reason, I see a lot of negativity toward them. Yes, sometimes they may say a little too much here and there, but most of the time their emotions are aimed at building the team's internal spirit. And personally, I'd rather watch lively, bright emotions than bland and sad faces, even if that is supposed to mean focus. I think it only adds more color to an already beautiful sport. What do you think about that? Congratulations to Dynamo on a well-deserved championship, a nice achievement after last year's failure caused by that forced trip to Dubai. And I have a feeling that next season they could be contenders for success again. And I'm waiting to hear your thoughts not only about this final, but about the whole championship in general. Which team's players and matches stood out to you the most? I'd really love to know your opinion. Hopefully, after the final match of the Bronze Series, I'll also make some kind of video if you're interested in that. And with you, as always, was Nick. Love what you do and you will definitely succeed. See you soon. Bye.